For years, the victims in these cold cases wondered if they would ever get justice. But in each case, law enforcement continued to look at tips and use the latest technology to finally solve the crimes. Number 5. 6 years after a jewelry store heist, police cracked the cold case using evidence from 2 earlier burglaries. The heist took place at Shepperton's Thomas Jewelers on February 27, 2010. In the dead of night, someone had broken into the store in Victoria, Australia through the roof. A rope was used to lower the thief down into the store and for him to make his escape afterward. The store's owner arrived that morning to discover more than $192,000 worth of jewelry missing. There was no CCTV evidence, and police were left clueless. The case went cold for a while. In 2014, the first big break in the case came. For undisclosed reasons, police connected the crime to 2 other robberies that had taken place 5 years earlier. In March of 2005, a thief broke into a work site in Shepperton. About $600 in money and tools were stolen. During the robbery, the thief smashed open a vending machine and helped himself to a can of Coca-Cola. After drinking the beverage, he left the can behind and fled with the money. The following month, another burglary took place, this time at a hardware store. This time, the thief scraped himself on a fence, leaving behind DNA evidence. The DNA in the 2 cases confirmed them to be connected. In 2014, police connected the jewelry store robbery. The connection didn't immediately solve the case, though. The DNA didn't match anything in the database. Police just had to hope the criminal would strike again and be caught in the act. In 2016, police learned that had already happened. Around the same time the 3 cases had been connected, 30-year-old Alex William Laycock was handed a prison sentence for an armed bank robbery. As part of his sentence, he submitted a DNA sample. It took time for the sample to be submitted, but by 2016, police had connected him to the 3 unsolved cases. By this point, Laycock had been released from prison and had turned his life around. He'd committed the robberies to fund his illegal substances habit and had managed to get clean. He confessed to the robberies and was handed a partially suspended prison sentence. Number 4. The attack that took Paul Aikman's life in 1985 remained unsolved for almost as long as the florist had been alive. 35 years after his body was located in a lonely turnpike, DNA evidence found at the scene of the crime finally revealed who was responsible. Paul was a 35-year-old florist and female impersonator living in Oklahoma City at the time of the crime. According to a friend, he was a homosexual and would sometimes meet men at rest stops. He also picked up hitchhikers from time to time. It seemed like one of these chance encounters had led to a terrible end when Paul's body was discovered on September 18, 1985. Paul had been driving home from a club in nearby Tulsa at the time, but never made it home. Instead, his body was dumped near a turnpike rest stop. He had multiple wounds from a bladed object. Police investigating the crime at the time located cigarette butts near Paul's body. His car was also found nearby, and a latent fingerprint was found on the door handle. As there were no suspects and no matches for the evidence, the case went cold. Over the years, Paul's family continued to push for answers. His cold case was one of 52 featured on a pack of playing cards that were distributed in prisons, with the hopes that one of the inmates would recognize the case and provide answers. It would turn out a prison inmate did have information that could solve the case, but he didn't come forward willingly. In 2020, detectives reviewing the cold case went through CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, and discovered a match. 4 years earlier, in 2016, a man named Earl Wesley Wilson was handed a 5-year prison sentence for a separate crime. He had to submit his DNA and fingerprints. They would both match the evidence found at the crime scene. When interviewed, Wilson claimed to have never met Paul and had no explanation for why his fingerprints were on Paul's car door, but the truth eventually emerged. Wilson's ex-wife told investigators that she had picked him up from a gas station on the day of the crime. He had previously called from a McDonald's near the rest stop and said that he needed her to pick him up. When she arrived, Wilson was gone, but later called from the gas station. He said that he had gotten a ride from someone, but the driver had made a move Wilson didn't like, so Wilson attacked him. He confessed that he didn't know if the man was still alive. Wilson eventually confessed to taking Paul's life and was handed a 20-year prison sentence. Number 3. At 1:35 p.m. on March 3, 2003, Lieutenant Jeff Green tried to make what he thought was a routine traffic stop in Watauga, Texas. The criminal was actually a bank robber trying to make a getaway after a successful job, and the stop almost cost the police officer his life. About 15 minutes before Lieutenant Green met the criminal, the man had been robbing the nearby Bank 1. The suspect walked in wearing a straw cowboy hat and a fake mustache. He told the teller he was armed and demanded money. The teller handed over an unknown amount of money, and the criminal left without using the weapon that he had brought. He fled the scene of the crime in a red Jeep Wrangler. At 1:35 p.m., Lieutenant Green spotted the Jeep speeding and making a dangerous turn in front of him. He chased after the car on his motorcycle and tried to get the man to pull over. Instead, the Jeep went off the road to make a U-turn and drove at the police officer. The criminal opened fire at Lieutenant Green, striking him in the ankle. The police officer returned fire but apparently only hit the Jeep. Lieutenant Green made a full recovery, but the criminal managed to get away. The police force worked to try to identify the suspect and soon uncovered that he had also been responsible for a number of other bank robberies. He would usually wear fake facial hair and sometimes an earpiece, though that didn't seem to be connected to anybody else. At some of the crime scenes, the criminal left behind DNA evidence, but it didn't result in a match. Multiple appeals for information were made, and a still from CCTV footage of one of the robberies was released. A number of tips were sent to the police, but none led to cracking the now cold case. Finally, in 2021, the police turned to genetic genealogy to try to crack the crime. Using the tool, they were able to identify Mark Allen Long as a suspect. Long was living in Oklahoma at the time, and officers traveled to the state to try to confirm he was a DNA match. After watching Long eat at a restaurant, officers took items that he had discarded and ran the tests. Long was confirmed as a match. Lieutenant Green also identified Long in a lineup. Before Long could be arrested, he passed away in April of 2022, but the cold case is finally solved. Number 2. Lisa Holsted was last seen alive in the early morning hours of August 12, 1986. She and her boyfriend, John Sott, had been driving home from a family gathering when they got into an argument and Lisa got out of the car. Hours later, her body was discovered. It would be another 36 years before the case was solved. John and Lisa lived together in the Green Bay area of Wisconsin at the time. Lisa was a mother to a 5-year-old son, Jeremy, who was staying with family that night. So the young couple wasn't in a rush to get home. It was about 2:30 a.m. when Lisa got out of John's car during the argument. They were about a mile away from their apartment, but Lisa said she was going to walk. Lisa never made it home, and when she was still missing the following morning, John called Lisa's mother, then reported his girlfriend missing. It was only a few hours later that construction workers spotted Lisa's body in a marshy area in what is today Ken Ewers Nature Park. There were tire marks near her body, and it was later discovered that her own blouse had been used to take her life. John was initially a suspect in the investigation. The way they had parted ways seemed suspicious. John continuously denied any involvement in the case, and there was never any evidence pointing to him taking Lisa's life. He remained a person of interest, though. DNA was uncovered from Lisa's body, but there was little that could be done with it at the time. Lisa's case soon went cold. It featured on shows like Crime Stoppers in the years after Lisa passed, and new tips were reported to the police, but none of the tips worked out. Over the years, the police in Green Bay continued to review the case, determined to get justice for Lisa. People were re-interviewed and evidence was re-examined, but it wasn't until 2018 that the technology emerged that allowed police to finally close this case. The DNA found at the crime scene was submitted for genetic genealogy testing. A profile of the suspect was created and a family tree emerged. A man named Lou Griffin emerged as a potential suspect. Griffin had moved to the Green Bay area a month before Lisa passed away and worked as a truck driver. He also had a history of violence, especially towards women. Detectives trailed Griffin and collected a beer can and a cigarette butt that he had discarded. DNA from both matched that was found at the crime scene. When he was initially interviewed, Griffin claimed to have no knowledge of Lisa. When confronted with the DNA evidence, he admitted that he may have met up with her the night that she passed away, but he had been drinking and using illegal substances that night. Griffin was arrested and faced trial, but in January of 2023 pleaded guilty to taking Lisa's life by reckless conduct. Number 1. When 49-year-old Ray Joe Clark had his life taken in February of 1981, it was an important case to the Washington County Sheriff's Office. That was because Joe was one of their own, a lieutenant who had worked for the police for 14 years. In 2016, the man responsible for this cold case was finally convicted. Joe was a by-the-books police officer who was well-liked by almost everybody at the sheriff's office. At the time of the crime, he was leading a push against gangs selling illegal substances in the Marietta, Ohio area. On February 7, 1981, he conducted an interview with the local media about the push to clean up the area, then spent the day relaxing with his wife, Patricia. That evening, the couple was watching the basketball game when Joe got up to go get some snacks. When he went to the kitchen, a bullet was fired through the back window and struck Joe. He passed away due to the wound. Police immediately began the search for the criminal responsible. It was believed that Joe's work cleaning up illegal substance-related crimes had made him a target. What's more, a low-level dealer was also taken out that night. Police interviewed members of the community who were involved in that sort of crime. They were able to find the person responsible for taking out the dealer, but nobody knew anything about Joe. Most didn't even know who he was. Evidence found at the crime scene included bullet cartridges and a set of boot prints in Joe's backyard. Witnesses also reported seeing a suspicious car near Joe's home. It was a blue Ford Pinto seen idling outside. Nobody had gotten a good look at the driver, though. Despite the intense effort by police officers, the case went cold. In 2012, the sheriff's office set up a cold case unit and Joe's case was looked at again. They were able to determine the type of weapon used in the crime, a type that was standard issue for police officers and military personnel. Then came an important tip that finally helped crack the case. A few years before the crime took place, Joe had led an investigation into one of his coworkers. Deputy Mitchell Rubel had attacked a burglary suspect in order to get a confession out of him. Rubel was dismissed from the police force and was bitter towards Joe in particular. Rubel had an alibi for the night of the disturbing crime. He had been with a friend, Bob Smithberger. Smithberger initially confirmed the alibi, but after being granted immunity, he confessed to driving Rubel to Joe's house and waiting outside while he took Joe's life. The weapon used in the attack was also recovered. Rubel still didn't confess, but after 2 trials, was found guilty and spent the rest of his life behind bars. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.